I started out being a rock fan. I was a music fan before there was rock, but of course, when the Beatles hit Ed Sullivan, the whole world changed. And not only was I a rock fan, but I got to participate and meet a lot of artists who are now part of what's called classic rock over the years. And in addition to that, I got to attend some amazing live concerts over the years. And I'd just like to run down some of those for you because we're going to talk about a live concert in this episode. And it was an incredible one. But let's go back and kind of relive my youth and some of the concerts that I've seen. Naturally, I'll start with the Beatles. I saw them live once in 1965 and again in 1966 in Chicago. And of course, that was an amazing experience. I went to a gymnasium and I saw the Mothers of Invention, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, open for the Cream. Again, an amazing live concert. And then at another Mothers of Invention concert in Los Angeles, which again I've talked about in a previous episode, Frank Zappa actually walked down to the center of the stage, looked right down to where I and my girlfriend were seated in the front row center, and thanked me on the stage for playing the Mothers live at the Fillmore East on my radio station. Whoa! I've seen the Rolling Stones many times, from big stadiums to very small venues in Hollywood. I saw Paul McCartney, of course, with the Beatles, but then with Wings, and then later on with a band that now he's been touring with for over 20 years. Again, whoa. As for the other Beatles, I saw George Harrison on his Horse, Dark Horse, tour. And then I saw Ringo Starr not long ago here in Atlanta with his All-Star Review. Now, I did not get to see John Lennon at any time after the Beatles broke up. I got to see Led Zeppelin, where I sat on the floor in a very small club in Chicago. And then I saw Bruce Springsteen, again in a different gymnasium, and then also at the LA Coliseum, which of course I've talked about when I talked about Bruce Springsteen music a few episodes ago. And Neil Young was always a favorite of mine. So I got to see Neil many, many times as a solo artist with Crazy Horse. Actually, I saw one of the very first concerts that Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young performed together. As a teenager growing up in Illinois, I saw The Who appear in a barn. And in that same barn, I saw Buffalo Springfield. Whoa, again. And in that same barn, I saw one of my favorite bands many times from Chicago. They were the Crying Shames, and they put on a great show. I also did a 3-part interview with the lead singer, Tom Doody, so you might want to check those episodes out as well. I've talked about how I saw Pink Floyd on the grass at UCLA, and I've seen Jefferson Airplane, the Grateful Dead, Moby Grape, all those great San Francisco acts. Jimmy Buffett, James Taylor, Joni Mitchell. It's been an incredible experience to see live concerts. And boy, I've seen a lot of them. That's just to name a few. And they're all fun in different ways. But in this episode, we're going to talk about a live concert event that I did not see in person. Like almost half of the world's population, I saw it on television. Now let's go back to July 13th, 1985, when almost half of the entire world was watching as rock music took over the airways for a charity event. We're talking about an event that was called Live Aid. Are you ready? Well then, let's drop the needle. It started in 1984 when Bob Geldof of a band called the Boomtown Rats and Mitch Uri of a band called Ultravox had watched a BBC documentary that detailed the horrors of famine in Ethiopia. And they decided they needed to do something about it. So they wrote a song, which was called Do They Know It's Christmas After All? And then they reached out to their friends to record a charity single where the money could go to help the famine. The wildly successful single included following artists: Bono, Phil Collins, Boy George, Simon Le Bon of Duran Duran, George Michael, Sting, of course Bob Geldof and Mitch Uri, Paul Young, David Bowie, and even Paul McCartney. Now, to say the single was a success is an understatement, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. Because as it turns out, Boy George and his group, Culture Club, played a number of concerts at Wembley Stadium, and on one of those concerts, they were joined by a lot of the musicians who had appeared on that Christmas charity album. And that got Boy George thinking. So he called up Bob Geldof and he said, you know, we need to do a charity concert which will raise a heck of a lot of money for those people starving in Ethiopia. And this was the genesis of what became Live Aid. So after Boy George called Bob Geldof, he and Mitch Urey got talking and they went, yeah, let's do a concert and let's call it a global jukebox. And the idea was not to just do it at Wembley Stadium where maybe you have 5,000 people, but make this a huge international event which can actually make a difference. So the idea was, yeah, we'll do a concert at Wembley Stadium, but let's do one at somewhere in the United States, which turned out to be JFK Stadium in Philadelphia. And the idea was, we'll do them simultaneously. And what if we could broadcast them to the world? And so they did. They hooked up an international broadcasting network that went to 150 countries with 1.9 billion people tuning in to watch. As I said before, about over 40% of the world's population. Now, they had grandiose plans for when they were deciding to do 2 concerts in 2 different continents. And part of it was that David Bowie and Mick Jagger were going to sing a song where Bowie was in the UK and Jagger would be in the US. And they were going to do Dancing in the Streets, and they were going to sing that together. But the problem was, and you know this if you watch live TV, even today, years later, the problem is when you're dealing with that kind of distancing, keeping the audio in sync is very hard. You always see the news people go, and now what about this? And the guy on the other end is going, oh yeah, you know. So there is a lag. So they could not figure out how to do that. Now, what happened is that Jagger and Bowie actually recorded a video which they released later, which was them doing it. But for Live Aid, they couldn't figure out how to do that live. Now, as it turns out, both those concerts ended up being over 16 hours long. But because of the technology at the time, where you had acts appearing in London and in the US at the same time, sometimes the networks would be showing the UK, sometimes they'd be showing the US. So really there wasn't a complete documentation of the entire 16 hours. There were an incredible amount of acts at both concerts in London and in the US. And obviously, I'm not going to go through all of them and all the songs they do, but here are some of the highlights just to show you how massive this event really was. The London concert started with the Goldstream Guards playing God Save the Queen. Then Status Quo hit the stage with Rocking All Over the World, Caroline, and Don't Waste My Time. And then, of course, the man of the moment, who had arranged the whole thing, Bob Geldof, and his band, the Boomtown Rats, hit the stage to play their hit, I Don't Like Mondays. They followed that with Drag Me Down and Rat Trap. And then Elvis Costello kind of tweaked the audience by saying he wanted them to sing along with him on an old Northern English folk song. And you know what the song was? It was the Beatles' All You Need Is Love. Then we had Sting and Phil Collins hit the stage, and they played songs like Roxanne, Collins's Against All Odds, Take a Look at Me Now, The Police's Message in a Bottle, Collins's In the Air Tonight, and then The Police's Every Breath You Take. As soon as that song was finished, Phil Collins was whisked off the stage, taken directly to Heathrow, where he got on a Concorde and flew to New York. Once he landed in New York, he was picked up by a helicopter and taken to Philadelphia to the JFK Stadium, where he could appear on stage there. which made him the only musician to appear on both the London and the US stages of Live Aid. Pretty cool. Among the other groups in London, of course, U2 did Sunday Bloody Sunday, and Dire Straits came out with Money for Nothing, which they brought Sting on to do his I Love My MTV line in it, and then also Sultans of Swing. At almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon in London, Queen took the stage, and from all reports, they stole the show with over a 20-minute set, which you can actually see in the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, where they do a recreation of it. Or if you actually want to see Queen do it, you can find that online. They played Bohemian Rhapsody, Radio Gaga, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, We Will Rock You, and We Are the Champions. It's an amazing set, and as I said, most people consider it the highlight of the London Live Aid concert. But London wasn't near done. Up next is David Bowie, who does Rebel Rebel, Modern Love, and Heroes. And Bowie is followed by The Who do 4 songs: My Generation, Pinball Wizard, Love Reign Over Me, and of course, We Won't Get Fooled Again. But the concert in London was about to go to the stratosphere because the Rocket Man himself, Elton John, was up next. Elton played I'm Still Standing, Benny and the Jets, of course Rocket Man. Then he brought out Kiki Dee and they did Don't Go Breaking My Heart. And then he brought out Wham, and together they sang Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. Now, Geldof really wanted somebody from the Beatles to play as part of this, because he wanted kind of the British rock royalty to help close out the store. Well, of course you know who he got. He got Paul McCartney. And Paul McCartney appeared to play Let It Be as almost the closing of the concert in London, except there was audio problems. And Paul was the only artist in the entire day to have any technical issues. But for parts of the song, you can't hear what Paul is singing. But give it to Paul, the showman, he just shoulders on. And then the assembled crowd all appeared on stage to close out the concert by singing that original Christmas charity song, Do They Know It's Christmas After All? And so that was the day at Wembley Stadium where the UK really rocked the world with all of these acts, with all the money they raised to help deal with famine in Ethiopia. Now, as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist where you can listen to some of the songs that I've talked about in this episode. And here's the link, and I'll also put it in the comments below. It was incredible, but as I said, it was only part of the story. The other story is what happened in the US and then what happened after the event was over. Did Live Aid actually make any difference in relieving famine in Africa? Well, we'll check that out in the next episode, where we'll run through the acts that appeared at the JFK Stadium around the same time as all that music was happening in London. Like I said, an incredible live event. And even though I wasn't there, I recorded it all on my home VCR. Well, at least what the stations broadcast. Again, I don't have the entire 16 hours because that didn't quite happen, because they would cut away from England to go to the US. They'd put commercial breaks in. So it was interesting, and it was all live. So that made it even more interesting. Thanks for watching. We'll talk about the US component in the next episode. Until then, keep it rocking.
If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.